Okay, let's call the meeting to order, getting the gears from some of my committee mates. So I will first look for disclosures of pecuniary interest. And I'm not seeing any. So first, off the bat, I want to say that we're going to do a little bit of a change of order here. We are going to hear from our delegate, Ms. McGaw, first. And then we are going to item 4.2 on the public agenda right after that. So we're going to start with 3.1 and go with item 4.2, and then we'll follow the regular order of the agenda. And I hope that that is acceptable to my committee mates. Okay, so welcome, Ms. McGaw, and when you're ready to go, you'll have 5 minutes for your delegation, okay?
Okay, so I've just prepared something to read, as I'm not good with public speaking. So good afternoon, members of Committee and Protective Services Committee. My name is Alicia McGaw. As of 16 years ago, I was injured in a car accident, leaving me paralyzed from the waist down. As of right now, the chair is what I use to get around. After my accident, I had a new view of the world, just no more than a foot shorter. Things I could reach before are now out of reach, such as a soap dispenser in the bathrooms. I find that in most office buildings, there is only one wheelchair accessible washroom with automatic doors. Usually this is on the first floor, which is no good to someone if they are on the 5th floor. I'm still able to operate my own vehicle with the use of hand controls. When driving my van, it is tough to find parking at times in the city due to lack of spots. When I can't find an accessible spot, sometimes I need to park in 2 spots, which most Londoners don't appreciate, and in the past, my van has been vandalized. When I do find a spot, at times they are too small for the ramp that deploys from the side of my vehicle. This issue is not just a problem for people in chairs, but it's also a hazard for those who use a walker or a cane. Before my accident, I was an able-bodied person that never put thought to where a soap dispenser in the bathroom was, or worried about a step or two getting into a shop. What I am proposing to you today is not to jump and make any changes. What I'm asking is just for you to see the world from my view and spend a day in a chair. I would like for you just to have a normal day, but to do it from a chair. Go and do what you would normally do, go to meetings, lunch with colleagues or friends, travel the city, but only using paratransit, an accessible taxi, or LTC. Hopefully with this experience, we can make the City of London a lot more friendly for those struggling with mobile issues. Thank you for letting me talk today. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. You did very well. Anybody on committee have any comments or questions?
Thank you, and through the chair, I want to thank you very much for being here today with that challenge. I think that would be a very unique perspective. Is there an opportunity to do this in an organized way, or are you asking us to go out and be creative and find a way to do this in one of our days?
I do have Duramed on board to loan out chairs. So if we do want to do it in an organized fashion, they're more than willing to loan out manual chairs and power chairs.
Well, thanks, Chair. Sign me up. I'll get your contact information afterwards, and I'd be pleased to do that. And if we could spend some time together on that day as well, I could probably use some help and some advice.
That'd be great. I'm looking really forward to it.
I don't so much have questions. I wanted to thank you for coming in and for sharing the lens that you see the world through and that you operate through. I'd also be happy to figure out a time to do it. I'm sure many of our colleagues will. So I was initially going to ask if there was a specific day you wanted to do, but I wonder if rather than having 15 councillors contact you and work this out, if it's maybe best if you connect with our clerk's office and see what information you have that they can share with us, and then people can kind of confirm with you one-on-one. Or if you truly have no preference and want to manage 15 of us or up to 15 of us, I'm okay either way, but I am certainly happy to give it a try and see the world through your lens.
Well, that'd be great as 30 of you want to do it. I can manage all of you. I'm just, want to get like a realistic view out there and yeah, it'd be great if I could coordinate with one person instead of all 15 of you, but no, it'd be great. I don't have a specific day in time, but if you want to try and do it before the snow falls, it might be a bit easier again.
I think I'm planning on doing it before December 1st, so hopefully it won't snow by then. But a couple of suggestions here. One is I know that I'd be happy to lend some resources from my office. My chief of staff could help coordinate this for everybody if that's something the committee is interested in doing. Maybe if we passed a motion that we request that the mayor's office help coordinate this initiative, and then we'll reach out to you. You'll have one point of contact, and we can be in touch.
I don't know if the mayor wants to direct himself, so I'd be happy to put forward a motion that requests that the mayor's office connect with Ms. McGaw to make arrangements for a day in a chair and be the point of contact for such an event.
Thank you, and then that motion would also include receive Ms. McGaw's delegation. So, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. It is a very different experience. I remember in my last year of high school, I'd planned to go to the Western Fair with all my friends and was changing the oil in my car when it fell off the ramps, and I was very lucky not to completely lose a foot, but I was determined to go anyway, had it bandaged up, and at some point I had to get a wheelchair because I couldn't move around, and it's a very different experience to be down there when everybody is up higher and there's places you can't go, and it's a very different feel, sometimes a little lonely. So, it's good you brought that forward, and I certainly understand it's a good experience to have.
Thanks. Okay, so the clerks are working on the motion that Councillor Ridley's putting forward, and the mayor's seconding that motion, and it is that you will coordinate with the mayor's office on this initiative, A Day in the Chair, and invite city council members to participate. Thank you again very much for your delegation. You did a great job. Ms. McGaw, would you like your written submission as, if you want to submit that, we'll include that with the minutes and as part of the report going forward to City Council next week? Yeah, okay. And I'll open the vote.
Yay, manually.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Great, thanks committee. And moving right along, we will move to item 4.2, which is the Vehicle for Hire bylaw 1-year review. I will go to Mr. Katolik.
Yes, through the chair, the 1-year review indicated that the total number of rides have increased to 4.2 million. Uber provided 1.9 million, and the existing taxi limousine industry provided 2.3 million. So the ridership has gone up by over 1 million rides, and there has been a reduction of the taxi limo rides of around 700,000. The new bylaw certainly offers customers greater choices in terms of transportation options and payment options. The report also looks at some key industry issues. We meet with the industry regularly, and the issues are around caps on vehicles, caps on accessible vehicles. There are some discussions ongoing with mandatory cameras, streamlining the approvals process, and also eliminating the regulations for fares. Civic Administration will continue to meet with the industry and discuss these different options, and we could come back with a report on options this summer and a future PPM to move the bylaw ahead and continue to modernize this bylaw with new technologies in the on-demand transportation market.
Thank you, Mr. Katolik, for your report. I did want to ask a couple quick questions. The first question is obviously the cab limo industry has seen a reduction, a huge reduction in the rides that they're giving, and obviously with that reduction, a reduction in their earnings. I'm guessing 20 to 40%. Different people are suggesting different amounts, but it's a huge hit. Ask any business person, could you afford to lose 20 to 40% of your revenue, gross revenue? And many would say, well, that would put me right out of business. And for some, I think that may be happening. And I know for sure a lot of them are totally struggling. And I think I told this story before. One morning I was out on business and had to meet with a cab owner. And where I met him, there were actually a limo and a couple other cabs. And I asked, why are you all sitting here at prime time? And he said, because of Uber. There is no work. So that's one concern I have. And I had this from day one. But some people are making the argument that there's an increase of 1 million rides. And this has been sort of a short period of time in my mind. And I'm wondering, have you any explanation why there is such an increase in rides?
Through the chair, we have not done a survey of the riderships in London, but this is a global phenomenon. This is not something that's unique to London in terms of ridership. There are a number of universities in the United States and Canada that are researching this issue. They're looking at whether ridership has gone up or down in the transit industry, whether private vehicles for hire are actually complementing the transit industry in terms of first mile, last mile rides, or whether they are actually impacting the transit industry in terms of reducing their ridership. So there's been a lot of academic work around this issue. Once again, this is not unique in London. It's consistent with other cities that have reported out, Mississauga and Ottawa. Ridership has gone up. Taxi limousine ridership has gone down. But from a total perspective locally, the pie has gotten bigger in terms of ridership.
Well, that throws my theory out that the pie would not get bigger, but rather the same, and it would be divided. So I have another theory, and I want to ask if this is possible. Is it possible that a lot of people were giving rides and that they were going, they were off-grid, cash and carry, sort of, and that now with Uber, many people opted to go with Uber because they saw what an opportunity now to be legal, to, you know, and so on. And so actually what we're seeing is reported rides, not unreported rides. Could that be part of this pie besides the, you know, maybe an impact on our transit system? Could it be a combination of different things like that, those cash rides?
Through the chair, I think there's always been bandit cabs. There always will be bandit cabs. We continue to get complaints about bandit cabs, scooping rides from Ubers, from licensed drivers. I don't have a analysis done to indicate what percentage of ridership has gone up or down because of bandit cabs, but where there's going to be an opportunity to do a cash ride, an unreported ride, obviously that's going to happen. With 4.2 million rides, I don't know how many of those are not reported, but I can say that we do audit the drivers. We do secret shopper rides throughout the industry, and 100% of the audit has been compatible with the regulations for the rides that we took.
Councillor Squire.
Yeah, a question through you, Chair, that I asked last time, and I'm not sure if you've got this information yet, was how many people hold dual licenses? In other words, how many cab drivers also have Uber licenses so that they're doing both, depending on what day it is? And I think that might be helpful in in sort of telling us what the drivers are doing. In other words, are they migrating into Uber, or are people staying where they are, or are they doing a combination of both? And I wonder if that is information that's either available now or will become available.
Yes, through the chair, there's 1,123 licensed taxi limousine drivers, and out of those, 28 are also driving for their private vehicles.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an issue that I've given a great deal of consideration to over the past number of years. And so when I saw the report in front of us, one of the concerns that I had was if we're directing civic administration to go out and do the consultation and then moving towards the bylaw, there's not a checkpoint in between. And I think that there's still a little bit more information that can come back to us, that we can scope the bylaw that goes to the PPM. So with this in mind, I did ask the clerk to prepare an amendment to the motion, which is substantially the same, except it's to ask the civic administration to report back to this committee after they've consulted with the industry, so that we have the information and can provide direction at that time that will go into any bylaw changes. So I'd like to put that motion on the floor for consideration of the committee.
Councillor Sully. Oh, you're good now. Okay, Councillor Sully.
Thank you, and to the chair. Mr. Katolik, my question was, I know when we're talking about the rides, are we tracking, I know it's hard to do, the answer is probably no, but are they shorter distances? Like, do we know if it's a short trip, a long trip? You know, is there a way where the data is broken down? Because I feel as if maybe perhaps the increase is maybe associated with just a different method, and maybe people are more inclined to use an app because it gets them, you know, to a shorter distance, so there's more of a usage, even though traditionally maybe someone might have not gotten on a trip that was only a kilometer away, or 500 meters. But I feel as if when I'm talking to people who are using Ubers and other ride-sharing companies, they're going shorter distances sometimes, and sometimes in the past they might have necessarily just walked, and now they're just opting. Is that possible?
Through the chair, that's not data that we collected. We looked just at the total ridership, but I do know that Uber has met with our transportation division, and I know that those types of topics were under discussion because it's important from a supply and demand analysis, from a local perspective on on-demand transportation, to have a good, solid determination of pickup points, destination, drop-off points, what the distances are, what time of the day they're happening, what day of the week they're happening. So I do know that those discussions have occurred, and Uber has no concern with me publicly indicating that.
Great. So it seems like you don't need any direction on that part. You guys are already heading in that direction, so that's great.
Okay, sorry, and I want to apologize. I went to Councillor Sully before Councillor Ridley was finished. Go ahead, Councillor.
That's okay. Madam Chair, I don't apologize. I think I wasn't clear enough. I had crafted the motion. I didn't read it out because I was hoping it could be put up on screen for my colleagues to see. So if they switch screens, they can read the motion I'm proposing. And I would like to move that motion and look for a seconder, recognizing that there may still be some other questions. I tried to wait till my colleagues had all spoken. But as indicated, the motion is substantially similar to the staff recommendation, with the exception of reporting back to us prior to forming the new bylaw and starting the PPM process.
So Mayor Brown has indicated that he would like to second that motion. So Councillor, you have that up on screen. If people want to toggle to the presentation screen, you can see the motion that's before us. And can I go to another councillor? Well, okay, Councillor Armstrong.
Did you need a seconder? I'm not sure.
The mayor just said he would second.
Oh, okay. I'll certainly support this. I mean, if we are going to have this, then I think it's important that you know, that we do follow this process, I think it'll be better, so.
Councillor Van Holst, and then Councillor Squire.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to our staff. I wanted to ask about the Uber Eats program. I know they're doing some deliveries, and I'm wondering if those are included in the statistics of rides. Is that considered a ride or not?
Through the chair, no, and we do not regulate the delivery of food.
Thank you. And in the section on page 75 and 76, where you're talking about the ongoing industry consultation, do you believe that all of these issues will likely come forward for approval? And if not, maybe which ones of these might seem to be getting a greater deal of support from the industry?
Through the chair, certainly there's not unanimity amongst the industry on these issues, specifically with the caps on cabs, the caps on accessible cabs. I think everybody agrees to move forward into a streamlined approval process. If there's one bylaw that keeps looking at having amendments to it, it's this bylaw, and it's strictly because of modernization and technology. The issue of cameras has come up again, and the issue of should the regulators, the city, be involved in regulating fares, or should the marketplace dictate that? So those are the issues. There's certainly not unanimity in the industry, but it'll be a wholesome public participation meeting when we put these issues on the table.
Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to support the motion and the amendment. I think the important thing, at least for me going forward, is we've now in our 4 years sort of gotten to the point where we're seeing Uber operating. We're seeing what the results of that are and how it's increased the number of rides. I think we're eventually, maybe it'll be the next council, we're gonna have to move the next step, which is how do we incorporate this huge new area of transit into our public transit system? How do we make sure that it's complementary to what we're doing moving forward? Because certainly other municipalities have done that. They've used Uber or Lyft or whoever it is as they come into market. They don't fight with them. They figure out a way to work together with them to complement the services we're already offering. So I think we can have meetings and meetings and meetings and discuss things that I hope will help the taxi industry and make this less cumbersome. But I'm really looking forward to the point where we get to the other side of this argument and start saying, look, how can we work together? How can we make this work for everyone? How can we make this work for a transit system that we're paying for? We know that we're going to be having a summit coming up very soon where we're going to be figuring out a way to get into industrial areas. How are we going to get people into industrial areas and complement our current transportation system? And it seems to me that ride sharing is an ideal way to maybe do that. So the future's here, and I think we are going to have to accept that and move forward. And I think the time for having arguments about us versus them is probably no longer appropriate. We really need to work together.
Well, I just want to pick up where Councillor Squire just left off. There's a transit summit coming up on the 15th of May, and that's exactly what we're hoping to talk about. As you know, service out to industrial areas has been a difficult issue for fixed route transit to address. And whether it's a taxi or a limo or an Uber or some other competitor in the market, getting people connected into the fixed route transit and then from the fixed route transit to their place of employment, I think there's a really good opportunity there. And I don't think that fixed route transit is going to be able to address it. So on the 15th of May in the morning, I think that every company that's operating in this space has been invited, but in case they haven't, from 8 o'clock until 10:30 in the morning, there's going to be a transit summit talking about that specific issue, looking at how we can, different modes of transit can actually get people connected into job opportunities at different times of day and when the regular bus services work running and when it's not. And I do think that there's an opportunity there. I know we've made a lot of changes around transit in the last little while, and there's certainly some interactions there between any kind of ride provided by taxis or limos or Uber and transit. But last year, transit ridership was up 1.3%. So if it's countervailing that a little bit, you know, there's some rides that are going to other modes. Maybe the ridership growth would have been even higher. And I think that that is something we have to keep a real close eye on, because making sure people can get around in all the different various modes that they want to travel. They might want to walk this part, and then they're going to take a cab, and then they want to jump on a bus. There's all different ways. I know that's something we talk about a lot at Civic Works and at other committees, but here at the Regulatory Committee, I think it's important to keep that stuff in mind too.
Thank you. I'm not looking for more speakers, and I don't see anybody. We do have a matter of 3 requests for delegation status, and normally what we do at this committee is we approve those delegation requests for a future meeting. I'm looking to committee to see how they like Councillor Ridley and Councillor Selly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's in the motion that I put up, and I neglected to actually comment. I absolutely always support delegations, but seeing as this is moving to a PPM and specific staff consultation, my suggestion and anticipation was that those delegates could reach out to Mr. Katolik if they want to be part of the industry consultation, and if not, they could be referred to the PPM that would follow.
Okay. I see no further speakers or comments on that. I think that's a great approach to include those delegations as part of the consultation with staff, and then a future PPM if they do wish to address this committee directly. So we have a motion on the floor, and I'm not seeing any more speakers, so we can put the voting buttons up.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Great. So just to further clarify what just took place, we've directed our staff to consult with the vehicle for hire industry and to report back to this committee at a future meeting about the results of that consultation, and that the 3 gentlemen that requested delegation status to this committee to be part of that staff consultation, so to initially talk directly to our city staff, and if those delegates still wish to address this committee directly, they may do so at the public participation meeting that is coming up in the next little while. So moving right along, we'll now just follow the regular agenda. And so I'm wondering if anybody would like to pull any of the consent items.
Thank you. I did want to pull 2.1 and potentially 2.3.
So if I could get a motion then for 2.2 and 2.4, moved by Councillor Sali, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Any comments on those items? I'd like to make a comment on item 2.2, just a quick comment. This is another good news item coming from that area. We're seeing an increase in funding from other levels of government for that, and particularly I want to highlight the increased funding that's going to ATLOSA. And we know that that's one of our priorities through a number of different strategies, not the least of which is the London for All poverty reduction strategy. We highlighted Indigenous poverty and Indigenous homelessness as something that really needs attention and focus, and work with local partners on making that happen. So thank you to staff for that. And Councillor Helmer.
Just briefly on the homeless partnering strategy, colleagues will recall that we had some discussion about this with the MPs when they came into Corporate Services Committee. At that time, I think it was mentioned in the discussion that the way the homelessness partnering strategy funding works is there are large designated communities and there are small designated communities. The small designated communities receive quite a bit less money per person than the large designated communities, and London happens to be in the small category. Hamilton is in the large category. Just to give you a sense of the difference, Hamilton receives something like 5 times as much money as London. Hamilton's homelessness problem is larger than London's, but it's not 5 times larger. And I know that's something we've raised with the MPs. I know I've met with Peter Fragiskatos about this not that long ago, and he is working on it because I think he sees that that's not fair. That we need to figure out a formula for the funding that's going to be more equitable across communities of different sizes who have different kinds of issues when it comes to homelessness. And I think it's something that when the funding comes up for renegotiation, this is sort of the end of the 5-year window, that we need to make sure that that works for a city like London and not just for larger cities. And actually some that are smaller. Halifax, for example, is in the large designated communities category.
Thanks for pointing that out, Councillor. And I think it's also worthy to point out that London is a regional hub serving 2.5 million people in reality. And so we're drawing from a much larger base than just within the immediate area of London. People are coming here for our services because we have services to offer. Any other comments or questions, concerns about the consent items? Then we can vote on those.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, and Councillor Ridley, you pulled item 2.1.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I pulled this item and I'm not sure if I will have the ability to convince my colleagues, but I'm going to give it a try. And if not, I'm certain I'll be voting against the recommendation. But I have absolutely no interest in moving towards further regulating, creating more regulations in regards to short-term accommodations. So I'm only prepared to vote positively for Part A, and that's that the report be received. I'm not prepared at all to support by Part B. I just don't see the need for it, and I don't see the need for us to create further regulations. One of the things that's noted in the report is that there are concerns about how short-term accommodations are used, and that they can sometimes be used in ways that impede neighbors' ability to enjoy their property. And so my argument to that is that we have enough regulations currently in place that would address that. If there is a party, if there are noise issues, if there are those concerns, we have bylaws which would allow those to be addressed. And so I don't think that we need to do it through the short-term accommodation. So I would like both parts voted on separately, and I hope that I've convinced a couple of my colleagues to consider not moving forward with Part B.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question to staff. I know a few other communities already headed in this direction. I know you kind of touched on it in the past. I feel as if, though, the consultation still, regardless of where we want to head, is still important, because I know I've tried to get some feedback from members of the hotel sector and those pieces. I think that'll still be helpful in getting their feedback. I know when we talk about short-term rentals, I think there's still an important piece to protecting the consumers. So I just kind of want to get maybe a summary of the rationale for the Part B, I think just for those following at home, because I think I'm supportive of it, but hearing some of the comments from Councillor Ridley.
Through the chair, the summary of Part B are some options should council want to tweak some of our existing bylaws, specifically the rental licensing bylaw, the recently approved business licensing bylaw, the zoning bylaw, and look at the hotel tax regime that council supports in terms of taxing existing hotels, motels, and other lodging facilities. So these are certainly just options. Councillor Ridley is absolutely correct that we do have bylaws in place that address impacts and nuisance. such as the nuisance bylaw, the noise bylaw. We have zoning bylaws that if somebody is renting out, you know, their entire house over and over, it actually starting to look like a hotel, there's zoning bylaws in place. So this is certainly a council decision. If council wishes us to go forward with regulations, then we certainly have bylaws in place that we could tweak. But if council wishes to just receive the bylaw and we can use our existing bylaws and enforce those, then if that's the direction we'll follow.
Just to follow up, it seems to me that if we hypothetically don't have a short-term bylaw in place, and with the existing bylaws, it would become almost hard for you to know which properties are, you know, participating, because I know they use the word short-term, but that doesn't mean that it's not rented out every single day, 365 days a year. It's just the occupants are coming and going, but it still could be someone different living there every day for a whole year or 2 years straight, as we've seen in other communities and places like that. So does that kind of create a potential for a concern? Because then when you have like someone who's renting a home, they have to go through all these hoops and they have to, you know, register with the city and all those pieces. But then if I just happen to just post mines on a third-party app or a company, it just seems kind of a little bit contrary, I guess.
Through the chair, it's a very minor concern because certainly we're not Toronto. We're also not a tourist destination point, similar to Collingwood and Niagara-on-the-Lake, which are two cities that put regulations in place. So we're not seeing those types of issues. We're not hearing issues that tenants are being evicted because their units are now being turned into short-term rentals. So once again, these are just options, but we're not seeing the problems that other cities are seeing globally.
So last comment, just in anticipation, I know we're gonna have the Junos, which is great for our city, and we're gonna have a high demand on our hotels. They'll probably be all sold out, so I anticipate that there's gonna be a lot of those Airbnbs and all those kind of things. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there, that there's gonna be a significant high demand come 2019 for that area, and I just wanted to just kind of throw that in the mix as we're discussing.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. When I read the report, I came to the same conclusion as Councillor Ridley, so I appreciate her comments there. We do a lot of regulation, and I think we should be looking at pushing some of that back when it's not needed. And certainly, we have staff working very hard on a lot of things, so if this isn't a mission-critical piece, then I prefer we just leave it until such a time as a real problem comes up.
Mayor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I say this respectfully. This is new territory for us, and we're learning. We're comparing ourselves to other communities. But to me, what this looks like is really a solution that's looking for a problem to solve. You know, I look at the numbers in this report. It seems like there's a relatively low number of active hosts and active listings. 540 listings out of, you know, the 100,000 plus homes in the community. And then also, it looks like the typical nights hosted for these homes would be about 20% of a year. And I think that's important for us to look at as well. And then finally, the average annual host earns about $4,200. And so that might make a significant impact on that individual or family's budget, but it's not a significant number when we consider, you know, what a business would generate on a regular basis. And so, you know, I would be inclined to support Part A, to receive this information. I think this was really interesting information, but to put the remainder of Part B on hold until such a time as we need to take a look at this. If ever, I know that staff tell us on a regular basis that these things take time and they take resources, and when we direct resources in one direction, we can't direct them towards another priority. So I would certainly support Councillor Ridley's motion on Part A. I'd second that, but if Part B were to come forward as a motion, I'd be voting against it.
Councillor Squire.
Through you, Madam Chair. The other thing about Airbnb, having been a user of this, is that both the platform, Airbnb, and the customer are both rated on a continual basis. In other words, if you turn out to be a bad customer of Airbnb, causing problems and those kind of things, that's quickly sort of marked, and you're not gonna be accepted much longer. Similarly, people aren't going to go to an Airbnb that isn't clean, quiet, and that sort of thing. So I think, I agree that it's not something that's presenting a problem now, and I'd rather resources be used elsewhere. So I'm with my colleagues on this.
I think that some of the regulatory pieces are perhaps not necessary at this point, but I think on the issue of the transient accommodation tax, I'm not so convinced. You know, I know that Airbnb, for example, proactively enters into tax partnerships with municipalities all over the world. I think there are over 275 different jurisdictions where they say, we would like you to tax us. We recognize that we're conducting business and we're providing accommodation, and we think people should be fairly taxed and we should pay our fair share. And they work out those kind of agreements with municipalities, and sometimes at the provincial level. I think in Quebec it's at the provincial level. You know, I think we need to look at that, especially if we're considering the tax on other kinds of accommodations, that we might need to include that. I'm not sure the capacity of the other platforms, however. You know, I think Airbnb has a pretty sophisticated approach to collecting the revenue and remitting it to the municipalities on behalf of the hosts. I don't know that it's really going through the hosts directly. And I think that makes it simpler for the other platforms. I'm not sure that they're really equipped to do that. And I think that might prove to be more of a barrier for them. But I do think, my mind isn't really made up one way or the other at this point, but when we're dealing with the hotel tax that's coming forward, I think next week, I think we need to be talking about this as well. And I think it's good that our staff are raising it at the same time. I would agree that we don't seem to have a huge problem, you know, in terms of the impacts. And I think that's great. To put it in context, those 400 hosts, if they're earning $4,200 a year, that's $1.7 million a year in revenue going to those hosts, that's great. And the taxes on that, if we use the same tax approach, would be about $68,000. For an average host, you're talking about what, $168 to pay in taxes on their income, right? So I think it's quite reasonable, and I think we need to be fair when we're dealing with that issue on taxation.
Thanks, Chair. I think that the council raises a very good point, that if we could scope this down to transient tax and take a look at how that could be applied, it seems very reasonable. It seems very fair. This is a huge opportunity for our community to provide opportunity to invest in tourism, in attracting business travelers to London. And I think that, when we look at the users of an accommodation like this versus a traditional hotel, there's a lot of crossover there too. And so if the councillor were to bring forward a motion that was scoped down to that specific area, sorry, he's not on the committee, I'd be willing to bring forward a motion that would be scoped down to that specific level to ensure that we're treating, I think, everyone functioning within the industry fairly.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. And I saw a seconder in Councillor Sally. Are there any other comments from committee? Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. I took an opportunity to go back and double check how I voted on the transient tax. And what I think I heard at that time was that was being requested from the industry, is being requested from Tourism London, it was being requested from the hotels. We don't hear that with Airbnb. And so I'm an Airbnb host in another municipality. For all of my revenues generated, that becomes a part of my taxable income, and I pay taxes on that. So what I see here is an opportunity to layer an additional level of tax. I'm not personally interested in that, but I understand where other people may be. And so if that's being put forward as a motion, then I will not be supporting it, because I do see the revenues already hitting 2 levels of taxation in this case. So respect that people want to do that and feel that that's fair, could be fair, should be looked at, but it's not something that I want to support.
Yeah, no, I see where the mayor is coming from this, and that's why I decided to support it. I think it's worth definitely looking at. I think when we think about people coming to our community, it's great, but we also have to recognize the demand on our infrastructure that may have when you're looking at, I don't know how many what's the number for how many people are coming and what it might look like when someone's coming here and using our sewage systems and all those pieces, but that's just an added burden on the local taxpayer, and I don't think that necessarily is fair to them, so I'm just kind of be conscious of them, so I think it's very prudent to head in this direction.
Okay, I have a comment as well, sorry. And my comment is about the vacancy rate in the City of London. And I know that in other jurisdictions, the Airbnbs or the short-term accommodation rentals are having an impact on the availability of rental units in their cities, and especially affordable rental units. And so I'm wondering if committee might be interested in, so it's a small thing right now in London, but who knows where it will be in a few years' time. So I'm wondering if committee might be interested in civic administration reporting back, say in a year, to sort of give a status update on just like what they've done today. These are the numbers, this is what's going on as far as short-term rental or short-term accommodations. And I just think we need to stay on top of that because we have such a low vacancy rate, especially for one-bedroom units here in the City of London. I'm just looking at committee to see what they think about having staff report back, just to give an update on the situation.
I think that's an excellent idea. I would move that as a Part C to the motion to report back within 12 months, and I'll look forward to watching it from the comfort of my home.
Okay, and I see your seconder is fine with adding that in as well. Are there any other comments from our guests or? No? Okay, so we have a motion. It's the existing Part A. Part B would just deal with the transient tax portion. Would that still involve a public participation meeting? No? Okay, the clerk is working on the motion, so B deals with the transient tax. I think Mr. Kotsavas wants to jump in, and then Part C would be a report back in 12 months' time. Mr. Kotsavas.
Yeah, I believe in part, through the chair, the Part B for the transient accommodation tax, I believe the city treasurer is bringing a report forward soon on that matter. So I'm not sure if she'll have all the information available to her to include it in that report, but if not, we could always report back at a further time, and that would not require a PPM.
And we will call A, B, and C separately. I think when we call the vote, we can do A separately and we can do B and C combined. Okay, so we have item A of the motion on the floor, and we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, and we can put items B and C on the floor now. And we're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-2.
Okay, so we'll move to item number 2.3, and Councillor Ridley, you pulled that as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So when I was reading this, I wanted to flag for the committee, and I actually, first maybe what I'll do is ask if there is anyone here from the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee that might be able to answer a question. I know it's not typical, but sometimes we have committee members who attend. I don't see anyone flagging me down. So I wanted to flag for the committee on the original agenda we got on page 38. There's a request to do a public awareness campaign and that be incorporated into the already approved 2018 work plan. This doesn't come with any details as to any cost. There are some examples of how a campaign may happen. But I also am well aware that there is a significant community campaign that is already happening. And so I would be more than comfortable asking our Animal Welfare Advisory Committee to connect with the existing community campaign to see how they could work together, because I believe that they have some private resources that they're already putting into this. And if their expertise and contributions may help to expand one campaign, that may be better than running two simultaneous campaigns with two different sets of resources. So I'm not sure what language I need for that, or if we could just put that to the committee to maybe come back and let us know if they're aware of and are willing to approach the community campaign that's ongoing, to see how they could work together, and then come back to the city to see what additional resources could be layered into that to run one coordinated campaign rather than separate. So I'm prepared to make that motion, and I'm not sure what the wording is, but I'll leave that with the clerks.
So, Councillor, that, and for people in the gallery, that would be a referral for that clause alone back to the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. Okay, and you're going to move that?
I am, and I just want to be very clear, this doesn't mean that I don't support the campaign, it's that I'm aware of an existing campaign, and I think that there could be synergies if those campaigns work together, and so I just want our Animal Welfare Advisory Committee to explore that option. And I'm not entirely sure of the name. I do know that My Vet was involved. There was something that ran in the paper about a year ago, and I know that they're already spray painting private parking lots, and I feel like we maybe got a report to Civic Works of something similar at some point last year or the year before. So I would just like to explore that campaign and see if we can work together on one campaign.
So the clerk will work on the wording of the motion, first of all, but also the clerks will coordinate with the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee to make sure they have all the information they need when they get this referral back from us. So I imagine your motion will include the referral of that clause and then the receipt of the rest of the report? So that's moved by Councillor Ridley. Do we have a second? I'll second that. Any comments from committee? Seeing none, we can open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
Okay, so we're moving right along to this, back to the scheduled items, and we have item 3.2, which is a delegation from Mr. Schlemmer of Neighborhood Legal Services. So come on up to the podium, and Steve will help you raise it up. Welcome.
I say thank you, Chair and councillors. I have to send regrets for my board chair, Bonnie Quinnell, who hoped to be here tonight. If any of you know the Quinnell sisters, they're kind of legends in the disability community in London for several decades. But Bonnie's health prevented her from appearing here tonight. So I'm here as the Director of Neighbourhood Legal Services, and you've got my written little submission there. This arises out of a little dust-up that happened a couple of months ago that made the papers, I believe. And there was a bit of a difference of opinion about what happened there between us and some of the city staff, but we're past all that. And what is kind of left over, I guess, is that in the middle of this, an issue came up about whether the Uber bylaw was intended to apply to volunteer drivers. So somebody who gives a ride to somebody else and gets reimbursed for gas or expenses. And I think we all agree that it doesn't. It's not intended to apply to that. But on its face, if you look at the words of it, it isn't really clear that that's the case. I've included the relevant provision in the attachments to my package. And so the section under Vehicle for Hire bylaw says 1.1, vehicle for hire means a motor vehicle that is conveying or available for conveying one or more persons in exchange for a fee or other consideration. So the question is, what does in exchange for a fee or other consideration mean? Literally on its face, it would mean anything. If you get a penny, that's consideration. Again, I don't think anybody intended that it apply that way. And in fact, Mr. Card kindly wrote to me and confirmed that in his view, the city actually wouldn't have the authority to prevent volunteer rides because your authority is derived from the Municipal Act and your authority is to license businesses. By definition, if somebody is giving a volunteer ride, they're not running a business, they're not seeking to make a profit. So the problem that arises is that it happens that the ticket for an offense is pretty big, it's $2,260. And so where I come from as a fellow from the legal clinic, we advocate for disabled people, and it happens there are disabled people who have vehicles, who want to give rides to people, and they want to do it for reimbursement of their gas expenses, which makes sense because they're living on ODSP. ODSP does not fund gas, it funds a shelter allowance and a basic needs allowance. So if they're kind enough to go out and volunteer, to me it makes sense they shouldn't have to spend their own money to do it. And as you may know, that the way of the world nowadays is that everybody is strongly encouraging disabled people to volunteer to the extent of their ability. If they can go out and volunteer, that's great. It gets them out of the house, gets them away from their pain, disability, makes them feel a sense of connection with the community, and perhaps most of all, it gives them a sense of contributing something to the community rather than feeling that they are simply taking from the community as a disabled person receiving benefits. So it happens that in the context of looking into all this, we came across the definition of a person who's carrying people for hire that's contained in the standard Ontario automobile insurance policy, and that's in your package as well. I've extracted that section. So what happens is that in Ontario, there's something called the Insurance Act, which says that all Ontario automobile insurance policies have the same provisions. They're set out in the statute, and everybody has the same Ontario automobile policy. And so what it says is there's a general exclusion. It doesn't cover an automobile used as a taxi cab, a bus, a sightseeing conveyance, or to carry paying passengers. However, we don't consider the following as situations involving carrying paying passengers. And the bottom one is reimbursing volunteer drivers for their reasonable driving expenses, including gas, vehicle wear and tear, and meals. And that's why it's the case that if you are a hockey dad and you give a ride to some kids and you switch up who's driving each week or whatever, that's why your automobile insurance policy still covers you. Or if you are somebody who ride shares and people contribute gas, you carpool to get to work, that's why your car insurance covers you.
You have about 1 minute left.
Okay, so anyway, there is one exception under the Uber bylaws that exists right now, and this is a new bylaw. It makes sense that you pass it, things come along that you may need to amend it for, and I would submit respectfully that this is an amendment that you should make, and that is to add an additional exception along the lines of what's contained in the standard automobile insurance policy to expressly say, to make it clear to the public who are not lawyers, they're not business people, make it very clear to them, you can give rides to people without worrying about getting a $2,260 ticket. It definitely doesn't apply to you if you're only getting reimbursement for your actual expenses. That's the pitch. Thank you.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Schlemmer, you were here a little bit earlier. I think you're probably well aware that we are currently looking at this bylaw. I heard you say Uber bylaw earlier, but I know you know it's the vehicle for hire bylaw. And that's fine. So I have no problem asking our staff to take a look at how we classify volunteer drivers in the revision and of the bylaw, which we know is underway right now. One thing that I do think, however, is that we need to look at what the municipal purpose is, and if we look at it in terms of consumer safety, which is a municipal purpose, then how do we ensure things like police checks, which council has determined is of importance, right? How do we look at those pieces? And so those are things that I know our staff will look at in preparing a revision or a suggestion for change. I used to work for a nonprofit which had a large contingent of volunteer drivers, and they were all screened, and they were compensated for the wear and tear and reimbursement of normal mileage. And so I have no problem with that if there's a way we can make it more clear. But I think that where we need to be careful in straddling the line is, you know, if I jump in my car and say, I'm going to volunteer and Bill will give me $20 to drive him, where does that go in terms of, a vehicle for hire versus a volunteer? And that's what I think our staff can take a good look at, take a look at the organizations that are out there, and how would I, as an individual, come back and say, you know what, I am an individual, I'm not attached to big brothers, big sisters, and I want to volunteer for my neighbors. And I think there should be an easy process that they can contact the city and go through that process, that we can make sure that we're ensuring consumer safety. So I have no problem making a motion, asking our staff to look at volunteer drives in the upcoming review. And I don't know if I'll have a seconder, but I think it's prudent that we look at it from all angles and make a suggestion. And I expect that you'll be back when that comes forward to provide input on their recommendations. So.
Mayor Matt Brown.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm interested in the discussion that we're going to have here at committee. My pause is really the danger of overregulation, because again, I think that we have a situation that is occurring in our community on a regular basis that doesn't require regulation and that's fulfilling a need in our community as well. And what I'm hearing from comments to this point is potentially a system, a registration, a process that might just create an unintended consequence, which is additional barriers to a person that just wants to volunteer and do a good thing. And so what I'm wondering is if we could hear from Mr. Card, either now or at a future meeting, I prefer now, about whether or not there's a level of redundancy to this direction. Or if Mr. Card's not interested in providing that comment, Mr. Kotsifas.
Madam Chair, perhaps I could start and Mr. Kotsifas could take over. My position with staff was that there was no requirement for an amendment to the bylaw because we don't regulate activities that are not business, as Mr. Schlemmer has very, fairly pointed out. We've never charged someone who wasn't operating a business with this type of offense, and we're satisfied that the existing review process allows us to separate the two out. The problem that we're having is that if you create an exception, then there are lines that have to be drawn with the exception, and we're back into the same problem again. So the short answer I would give to His Worship is that Madam Chair, is that we don't need to regulate this area because we have the mechanisms available to fully investigate examples, and we're not in the business of trying to prevent volunteers from carrying out their volunteer work. I'll turn it over to Mr. Kotsifas.
Through the chair, that's more or less exactly what I wanted to say, but spoken in legalese. The other piece, though, is we did also report back on rideshare and how that fits into this. So we have addressed those matters in the past and taking payment or for gas and things like that, and how we do not regulate those. And so I think the matter's been addressed. It's been we have not enforced these provisions in any other way. We have not charged, as Mr. Carr has mentioned, and we will continue to enforce it. We're primarily interested in businesses. We're not interested in compassion services.
Just as a follow-up to that, I would say, and I'd thank Mr. Schlemmer through you for bringing this forward. I think one of the benefits of having this conversation is that at committee is that we can repeat again that this is not an area that would ever be enforced, and that we're not in the business of preventing volunteers from helping those in need. And so I think that's a very positive part of this conversation. I thank Mr. Schlemmer for bringing this issue forward. I will not support any kind of motion to move this along to indicate that we may consider exceptions to an area that doesn't require regulation. I think that it does introduce a level of redundancy. I said earlier in my comments that our staff have limited resources, and if we direct them to look here, then there's a potential that there's another priority that they're not able to focus on. So I'll leave my comments at that, but I would certainly support receiving this delegation and receiving this communication, and beyond that, I wouldn't support anything at all.
Councillor Squire.
Looking at it from the other point of view, I worry about people who are doing this as a business coming forward and saying, well, I'm a volunteer and I'm being paid X amount of money to cover reasonable wear and tear, gas, and meals. And I don't think we want to get into a situation where we're standing in a court trying to argue that issue or wasting our energy on that. And the one thing I've learned about our bylaw enforcement that I'm aware of, and I hope people in the city are aware of, is that they do give people every opportunity, and they are not interested in causing difficulties for volunteers. So I think the correct approach is to understand this. You now have an undertaking, Mr. Schlemmer, that we're not looking at volunteers, and I take staff at their word, so I think this should just be received.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other Councillor Van Holst.
I just want to say a thank you to everyone who does volunteer, because there are so many people doing so much work that as a city we could never accomplish in so many areas of the city, and that's why I think we want to have it be very clear that stopping that is not something we want to do, and we'll try to get out of your way as much as possible while you're out there helping people.
Councillor Sully.
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Schlemmer, for coming in and giving us your perspective. Just based on some of the comments that we heard here today, I guess, is there something further you could add to why you feel as if at this stage, based on just some of the comments from staff and stuff, that, you know, it would still be helpful to have that amendment?
We disagree about whether a volunteer was charged or not. We agree to disagree about it. To me, the way to make it clear is to make it clear in the policy or in the bylaw that it doesn't apply to volunteers. It does not say that. It says it applies to anybody who receives consideration for a ride. In law, that means if you receive a penny, then you are caught by this bylaw. So the reason that I'm here is because, as I said, if you're a volunteer in this city and you're deciding, am I going to give these rides or not? Well, if I'm wrong about this, I have a $2,260 fine. I'm living on a $1,000 a month ODSP check. That will destroy me, so I better not do it. Everybody else is trying to encourage disabled people to volunteer, so I would urge council to do that as well. And as I say, that the easiest way to do that is to add a line, just like what the province did with the Ontario automobile insurance policy. It's not a radical suggestion. To make it crystal clear that, again, disabled people can volunteer without risk of getting a ticket. And as I say, I have the greatest respect for the bylaw office, but we disagree about whether or not a volunteer has been charged. And clarifying this language, I submit, is the best way to make sure it doesn't happen again. But I will leave it with you.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm hoping just to wrap up, and I've asked the clerk, because I did reference a motion, and I heard Councillor Armstrong willing to second it at that time. So I've asked that it be a Part A and a Part B, so people who'd like to vote against Part B could. And what I was really looking at was really moving this matter to staff to consider. We're currently going through a review of many of our bylaws, and we're learning that some of them should be administrative processes. And by referring this delegation to staff to review or to consider in part of their review, they can decide if they need to develop an administrative process or if they're going to make a recommendation back to the bylaws. So I'm comfortable with that. I'm not looking to say to staff, yes, include this, no, don't include this. But I certainly want you to use that lens in the formation or amendment of any future bylaws. So that's what I'm looking to do. Part B may well fail. And if it does, it does. And Part A will still allow us to receive it. So.
I'm not seeing any further comments. So I have a question for staff. If somebody were to contact City Hall and say, I want to volunteer as a driver, how would staff direct them somewhere? What would be the response?
Through the chair, we do get those types of calls, and they're frequent, and we do educate them on the bylaw and how and the means available to them to legitimize their operation. So they could either do it through another volunteer organization, and that's, some of them are stipulated in the bylaw, or there's, we've talked about even through Uber or taxi or other types of services that do legitimize the service. If it's purely a compassion or those types of services, it's typically through those exemption clauses that we refer them to. So through like Meals on Wheels and those types of places that we'll pass their information on.
Okay, so and I understand that this is sort of seems like a new issue because of the private vehicles for hire that have recently been added to our bylaw, and so Mr. Kotsovas spoke earlier and said there's always been bandit cabs. So this could potentially not be a new issue if there is a problem with volunteers being charged as a bandit cab. So I know that going forward under this new vehicle for hire bylaw that we've enacted, but has there ever been a time in the past that somebody's been operating as a volunteer but charged as a bandit cab?
Through the chair, there's never been that investigation and there's never been that charge. The reality and the facts are in this case is that this complaint came in as a bandit cab with business cards, with internet advertising, and this individual was warned as a bandit cab and later charged as a bandit cab. Provided an apology, which was posted on various media, and the suggestions that our bylaw requires amendments to address volunteers is not necessary. It's problematic for future enforcement. The reality is anybody then that gets caught being a bandit cab simply says, I'm a volunteer. So that's the reality of where the rubber hits the road.
And this is
No, I'm
Point of
sorry,
order.
sir. It's okay.
Okay.
I've got it. It's okay. Yeah, you've had your 5 minutes, and no question was directed to you, Mr. Schlemmer. So I'm with Councillor Squire and with the mayor on this one. When staff say that we have never fined someone who was not operating a business, I take what staff say at face value. I also know of a number of issues on different bylaw enforcement issues from my constituents who have approached me, and I also have had the experience where staff have worked to resolve those issues rather than going straight to enforcement. So we have a Part A and a Part B. I will not be supporting the Part B, but we will put them up separately so committee may vote how they see fit. And I'm looking to have one last glance to see if there are any more comments, and I'm not seeing any. So we can put Part A of the motion on the floor, please, and that is to receive the delegation. Okay, so we'll vote on A, and then we will correct the wording on Part B. So this is Part A, the receipt of the delegation, and the vote is open.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I'm glad I caught it before we opened Part B, and I thought I was clear, but I'm a little bit scattered today myself. So the intent of my Part B was just to request that Civic Administration consider volunteer driving in the review and revision of the bylaw. So there was no direction to consult. It's, you're taking a look at the bylaw, take a look at volunteer driving, and if you want to incorporate it or not, let us know. I think my context and conversation were that I was certain we would hear from delegates pending what Civic Administration brought forward. So I'd like the motion to read as that. I do think it's something that people should support. And again, it's in no way bringing direction to Mr. Katolik or Mr. Kostovus, but just encouraging them to ensure that they consider it with that lens if they're bringing forward something. If law or any precedent changes, I would want to make sure that they've considered that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I appreciate where Councillor Bridley's coming from, but I think her intent, though noble, I think it seems as if staff is already clear on their position and legal advice. So I think it just then becomes just a decision of what we actually want to do with adding it or not. So I don't want to get staff to do something which they've already kind of made clear their position. So I guess it just comes down to if there's an amendment when the bylaw comes to add that amendment to for volunteer or not, that's a separate discussion. But the current motion seems as if asking staff to come back, and I think staff has articulated their position. So I just won't support since they've kind of told me what they want to do.
You have a motion on the floor? Is it moved and seconded? I just want to address it. If
You can, the vote is not open yet because the clerk is still working on she has the wording, but the system is giving her some issues. So go ahead, Councillor Arthur.
So the motion is more or less, thanks for allowing me to speak. I'm not a member of your committee, but I'm here to speak on something else. But the motion is what Councillor Wrigley has suggested. So, Madam Chair, my only concern about that, I think my concern is that, first of all, when this gets to council, or whether it's passed or not, if it passes at council, when it gets to staff, 2 or 3 months down the road, to me, it will almost feel as though we are saying to staff, consider this and incorporate it into the bylaw. I think that if we don't want it, we shouldn't include it, because 3 months from now, I will think that that's what we passed. So I would say if we don't want it now is the time to negate it, and if we want it, then we incorporate it. Let's not confuse staff with it. Just my thought on it.
So I think if you refresh your screen, committee, you can see the correct wording for B.
I truly and honestly do not have the patience to belabor this point. And so I apologize to my colleagues and I apologize to staff. This is not at all what I was requesting to do. I'm not requesting that you consider adding it. I'm not advocating that we add it. My intent and my purpose was quite simply, we are revising this. We hear that there are conflicting points of view regarding volunteer drivers. So staff, when you are considering and making recommendations to council regarding the bylaw, please consider that. If you decide that, hey, maybe we should include something, include it. If you decide that we shouldn't, then don't. At this point, quite frankly, please withdraw my motion. I entirely trust that our staff will consider this.
Thanks, Counselor. So there is no B, so we're done with that item on the agenda. So we will now move on to item 3.3, which is a public participation meeting. And I need a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Counselor Ridley, seconded by the Mayor. No, there's three of us. We have 1, 2, 3. So we have three. We have 3 votes, plus the Mayor. That gives us quorum. Councillor Ridley moved the opening of the PPM and the Mayor seconded it, so we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-1.
My apologies. That was yay. It was a more technical issue.
Okay, so the PPM is now open. I'll go to Mr. Katolik. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, Madam Chair, we received an application for a substitution for an adult live entertainment parlor from an existing parlor located at 2010 Dundas Street, currently operating as Gold Diggers, to a proposed location at 802 Exeter Road. The existing location at 2010 Dundas Street has been licensed since 1988 as an adult live entertainment parlor. As you're aware, the recent business licensing bylaw has regulations around these uses and does allow for substitution applications. The bylaw talks to certain regulations for adult live entertainment parlors not to be located on lands that are zoned residential, not to be located on lands close to residential, and not to be located on lands close to premises of schools, daycares, places of worship. The subject location at 802 Exeter Road complies with your bylaw on these business licensing regulations. To the immediate north, south, and east are hotel motel uses, and to the immediate west is an existing restaurant. The existing building is commercial in nature. It does have some vacant space at the front of the building, former restaurant uses. To the rear of the building is a licensed body rub parlor that has been licensed since 1999. We did a circulation to property owners within 120 meters of the subject property. We received 28 responses, and all responses were negative in terms of the substitution application. We are submitting this report for committee's consideration. Committee has several decision-making points that they can make. If committee chooses to accept the application, then the existing license at 2010 Dundas Street would be moved to this location. There would have to be some time period because renovations would have to occur at the subject location. If committee refuses the application, then the license remains at the current location at 2010 Dundas Street East. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katolik. We're in a PP. Oh, any technical questions of Mr. Katolik? Go ahead, Councillor Sully.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to confirm, did you want me to ask technical now or after? Okay, just a couple quick ones. Whatever decision is made today, just to clarify for people at home, I think some people had asked me and I tried to give them an answer. So this is not anything related with zoning. So the appeals would be different, and could you just touch on that just for those who've asked those questions?
The property is zoned to permit a tavern, so it would not, it's nothing related to zoning.
Councillor Usher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair, sorry. You certainly, I made a mistake there.
It's okay, Councillor. My voice is kind of deep because of my flu, so.
It wasn't your voice.
Honest
I was just
mistake.
accustomed to, it's my negativity in this. A couple of questions to Mr. Katolik. I don't know if you could answer them. but are we aware of the most use of the hotels in this area? And what I'm getting at is, on the weekends, these hotels are packed with youth. And I mean packed, because many of them come from outside. I won't go into the details, I'll address them. I just want to know if we're aware of the use of the, who uses
So
these
your
hotel?
technical question is?
Who use this hotel mostly?
Okay. For staff.
Oh, sorry.
Through the chair, that might be something better answered by the Hotel Motel Association if they wish to speak tonight.
So my other question, are you aware that there is a place of worship in one of these hotels that have been existing there for more than 10 years? And does that meet the criteria of a place of worship?
Through the chair, no, we're not aware of that.
Can you tell me what's the criteria, how much distance? Would you remind us, myself and the public, what distance you have to be as a resident away from one of these organizations?
100 meters.
100 meters? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Sorry, press the wrong button. I guess the thing is Councillor Usher is raising an issue about a church, I guess, in a hotel, and I certainly would like to hear more about that. Where is this church? Which hotel is it in?
So Councillor Usher asked if, as part of his technical questions, if staff were aware of this place of worship, and Mr. Katolik said that he was not. So if we're going to get more information from Councillor Usher, I'd like to wait for that during the discussion and debate portion of the meeting, please.
Fair enough. Okay, technical question to Mr. Katolik. You mentioned if the, this request was granted, there would be renovations required or are going to take place. So would I assume that any new establishment in this building would have to adhere to today's building standards?
Through the chair, any new construction that would need to occur would have to conform to the current Ontario Building Code. So that would be any new renovation.
That would be accessibility.
Through the chair, accessibility is part of the code. So if they are touching things like the front entrance, for instance, then those types of things would need to. It depends on the extent of the renovations that are proposed.
What I'm trying to suggest, because later on we're going to be comparing apples to oranges, and so this building would have to be totally accessible under today's standards, would have to meet today's fire code standards, where an older building that's been existing, that's been in operation, would only have to meet the standards of the day, not today's standards. Am I right?
So through the chair, if I can be of assistance. So any existing building is to be maintained so there's maintenance provisions such as our property standards bylaw and the fire code, which is really a maintenance regulation. So all buildings have to conform to those documents. If you're proposing new construction, such as renovation, additions, alterations, that work that you're proposing for new is subject to the Ontario Building Code. It only deals with new construction. It does not deal with existing. So even in this case, the portions of the building that are existing and are there today would not be subject to new requirements, because it's only what you touch would be required to be upgraded.
That's clear. Thank you.
Councillor Zaifman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first, thanks to Councillor Usher for the question around the hotels. I'm sure through the public participation, we'll hear a little bit more about that. My question, my technical question, just out of curiosity, it doesn't really talk about it in the report. I know we've dealt with these issues for a bit of time now. The existing location where the operation is, if I'm not mistaken, is it currently operating or it hasn't been operating for some time? I'm just looking for some clarity on that.
It is currently operating.
Through the chair, thank you for that. And my second question is in regards to, I don't know if this is necessarily something that would be of substance to the discussion or not, or more of a debate matter, but I know that staff mentioned that the front portion of this building is currently vacant. To my knowledge, when I order food from here on a fairly consistent basis in the restaurant that's in there, it's not vacant. So just wondering if there has to be any leases that will be broken, but I guess that might be a private matter and not necessarily something for staff to delve into, but just at least for the last 2 weeks, it was open.
We were advised that this location is vacant, and when I undertook the site inspection, it appeared to me as being vacant. So I don't know whether food is being processed there and delivered or on takeout basis.
Through the chair, so I guess we may need to figure that out, but I'm wondering if that will make any difference to this application or not, if it is currently operating.
Through the chair, that would be a private matter because the property owner certainly is aware of this application.
Any other technical questions? And Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an interesting situation because these are limited. They have to move from one place to another. So my question to staff through you is, was there any feedback requested from the residents or businesses around the present location?
Through the chair, no, the circulation was only for the new location, as the current location has been in place for approximately 30 years licensed.
Any other technical questions? Councillor Armstrong.
I don't think it's it's only to staff, correct? Okay, no.
Okay, so before I go open it up to members of the public, we have a delegation from Mr. Khan, and I'm assuming it's a Mr. S. Khan. Is S. Khan in the room? And I'm not seeing it. So we'll go to members of the public. Do any members of the public wish to comment? Okay, sir, there's a microphone there. You will have a maximum of 5 minutes for your delegation. Go ahead.
Good evening. Everyone can hear me okay? My name is Martin Quarkapoma, and I'm an associate and urban planner with Weston Consulting. I've been retained by the owners of Town Place Suites as well as Southside Grill, who own and operate businesses immediately adjacent to 802 Exeter Road. I was brought in to review this request to relocate this parlor and provide a planning opinion in terms of its adequacy of the proposed location. So I prepared a handout in terms of where these lands are that my clients own and where this proposed relocation is. I didn't realize I'd be this far away, so it might be a bit hard for me to
The clerk's coming up to get it.
Awesome, thank you.
If you could speak directly into the microphone as well, that would be great.
Behind me, maybe to stand. Is that better? Not really?
A little bit closer.
Maybe I'll just do.
Sorry.
There we go.
That's good, thanks.
Okay, there we go. So I'll just wait for the clerk to jump up here. May I
You can go
continue?
ahead and keep speaking, and she'll be on her, she's just on her way there.
Okay, so once you receive the handout, you'll see that my client's lands are right adjacent to the property. On the overhead you have right there in front of you, it's the property to the north and to the west of 802 Exeter Road. So my client's land would be the most impacted should this parlor decide to relocate to 802 Exeter Road. In addition to, Town Place Suites there and Southside, there are numerous other hotels and operations that exist along Exeter Road and other restaurants as well. And on the handout, you'll see about 7 or 8 additional hotels that could be impacted by this proposed use should it relocate. The intent of this graphic is to show the context of this proposed relocation. There are a number of commercial and retail uses in the neighborhood along Wellington Road. These uses include some big box retail. It's also very close to the off-ramp from the 401, which would be a gateway into the City of London. Having this proposed use may not showcase the intent of the city in terms of what the city would like to be about. Further along Exeter Road, as you go up Bessemer, there is an existing employment neighborhood that consists of warehousing, manufacturing, and other industrial uses. As a land use planner, those are the types of neighborhoods and areas that are most accommodating to this type of use. In my submission on April 13th, I did a planning analysis of other municipalities and how they handle these types of uses. And in all cases, they limit and divert these types of uses to employment neighborhoods. So if I understand that this is a business, they've got to find somewhere to operate a business, and that is fully understood, but there are proper areas where these places should be located. And if you go up Bessemer, those are the kinds of areas that these proponents should be looking at in terms of a relocation site for this parlor. Councillor Usher made a comment about what the types of configurations and accommodations that these hotels do offer. With me are members of business owners, specifically from the Town Place Suites, as well as Southside Grill and others. And in terms of the occupancy, these are places that can have up to 40% long-term stay. So these are people who will be here day in and day out. In addition to that, they also accommodate families who are traveling for recreational tournaments. So in terms of will there be youth on these properties, yes, that's a high definite there will be, there is. And having a proposed use like this parlor on 802 Exeter will severely compromise the ability to operate existing uses on Exeter and will impact the profitability and long-term viability of these uses. So with that, I'm available for additional comments or questions. I'm also here with the purveyors of these establishments next door to 802, and we're happy to answer any questions in terms of any particular land use planning perspectives or in terms of any operational aspects as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You have a question for the delegate?
A couple questions, actually. Know the area well. And so I guess my first question, you mentioned, or would it be your suggestion that a more suitable locations?
Councillor Armstrong, that's the gentleman gave a delegation, and you can ask specific questions about some of the information he gave, but he's not here as an expert to advise us on anything. If you have specific questions about his information.
Madam Chair, I was getting to that, a specific question. If you allow me to continue, I'm sure
You used the word suggestion, and that set off warning bells.
He did suggest something.
That's not what we're not here for that. So let me hear your question.
Well, during your presentation, you proposed that a better location would be along Bessemer Road?
That's right.
Is that the street that's the next street over?
That's right. If you look to my handout, it's the next street over.
Councillor, I'm sorry, sir. We have a specific application in front of us about a specific address, and we're not going to start, especially during the public participation meeting, we're not going to start looking at a map and picking out locations where we would prefer the site to move. This is a specific application before us to substitute the license from one specific address to another specific address. That's what we're dealing with. We are not here to ask members of the public to give us their opinion on a different location that's not even before us today.
No, and I appreciate that, but that's what I just heard him give his opinion on, and he mentioned that other street would be a better site. Did I hear that right or
He's
not?
a member of the public. He can speak what he likes to speak into the microphone.
Okay,
We heard
fair
his
enough.
delegation, and we can move on.
Okay, good with that.
I'm looking for other members of the public in the gallery to see if anybody has anything to say to committee. Okay, go ahead. If you could state your name and your address, and if you're not comfortable speaking it into the microphone, the clerk can come up and get that from you quietly.
No, that's fine. My name is Stacy King. I'm the general manager of the Homewood Suites, and I'm also president of the London Hotel Association for London. I have to state my personal address. No? Okay. I just wanted to maybe touch base on the question that Councillor Usher asked with respect to the types of families and guests that we have staying in our hotels. We welcome hundreds of families every weekend, thousands of families over the course of a year, to all of our hotels in the city. And as mentioned earlier, on that corner where there is 7 hotels between Bessemer and Wellington Road, 13 hotels within a 1 kilometer radius, 3 of the hotels that stand almost side by side are extended stay facilities. 40% of our business are long-term guests that are there for insurance reasons, house fires, relocation. So those are residents in that area, regardless of whether you want to call them guests in our hotels. They are residents. They live there with us sometimes for years at a time. On weekends, our families that are staying with us, those kids are playing in grassed areas in our hotels and in our parking lots, running around the hotel areas, all within vicinity of this proposed parlor. So it's obviously a concern for all of us. Not to mention the fact that from the Hotel Association standpoint, we have been working with the London Police Human Trafficking Core Unit for 3 years now, trying to remove human sex trade workers out of our hotels because of the fact of the type of business that it brings to us. We've worked very hard at moving these people along. So I would like to just also bring forth a point. The current business located at Dundas, wherever it's located, prime business hours are usually evenings, late evenings, and weekends. And that's our prime business. That's our prime time of when our families are checking into our hotels, and the families are hanging out in our hotels, and evenings and weekends are our busiest times. Right now, with the current location, next to the residences and the businesses in that area, which are no different than where the businesses are right now, the reality is that those businesses operate Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 typically. They're closed evenings and weekends, so they don't have the same safety concerns or other concerns that we have. So that's what I would like to point out on behalf of all the hotels in the city and in the South End especially.
Thank you very much. Councillor Usher?
Yes, Madam Chair. May I ask my question to them that I asked Mr. Katolik? 2 questions.
Go ahead.
I know that there's a real interest in connecting with the public in this way, but at every PPM that I've been a part of for the past 7.5 years, the public have an opportunity to speak one after the other after the other. If we have questions at the end of that time, then we can ask them. And I'd ask that the committee consider moving in that direction.
Okay, thank you. Another member of the public? Go ahead, sir. Come up to the microphone. You have 5 minutes. State your name and your address, and if you're not comfortable, we'll get that information later.
Hi there. My name is Brendan Ainskow. I'm the general manager at the Town Place Suites by Marriott. I'm also the co-chair of the Ontario Restaurant, Hotel and Motel Association for London's chapter. I'm going to be fairly brief with my comments because most of it have been covered by my colleagues here. But I do just want to reiterate the fact regarding residential areas that our hotels do host tens of thousands of families every year. to our neighborhood. Many of those are staying for months, if not a year at a time, and our hotels are their homes. These are guests that are going to work every morning from our hotels. These are guests that are coming to visit the City of London to experience what London has to offer. And if I can kind of point back, actually, as we were reviewing a couple of the items on the agenda previously, there were a number of mentions from all of you about attracting visitors to the City of London on numerous occasions today. And now we have a proposal to place this type of an establishment at the main entrance to our city. This has been a major focus for our city for years to try and attract more people. If this is going to be one of the first things that our visitors see as they enter our city, because Exeter is the main entrance to our city, we do strongly feel that that's going to impact the taste that's left in the mouth of tourists coming to visit us. So I do hope that that will be considered, and that is all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else wishing to speak to committee? No members of the public? I'll ask one more time. Any members of the public looking to?
I'd like to speak.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was looking up there. I didn't even see you. Go ahead.
Madam Chair. My name is Christos Vitsenzatos. I am counsel for the applicant in this matter today. I'm here to speak in favor of the application, the proposed substitution request. As councillors are aware, we were here several months ago hotly debating the bylaw, and now this is the first glimpse of its operation. The new bylaw has new signage requirements and allows for the mobility of this license. And I propose that this license, from what I understand, speaking to council, Mr. Katolik and other members of the staff, that this license submission conforms to the new bylaw. The reality is the present location isn't beneficial to the residents of Argyle and East London. It's located next to the YMC daycare, a library, residential dwellings, religious sites, schools, and shopping. There's foot traffic in the area. And we've heard during the bylaw process from hundreds of people in East London that they want it out. And we are offering an opportunity to remove the parlor from its present location and put it somewhere that has minimal impact upon the people of London. The current proposed location has an adult body rub parlor that isn't being questioned, isn't raising any concerns, has the OPP station and the commercial establishments. Little foot traffic occurs in that area. The three main concerns that have been raised, and the applicant is cognizant of those concerns and wishes to work with the Hotel Association in finding a workable solution, is the decrease in their bookings and the impact it'll have on their profitability. That's fine and dandy if you're a large corporation, but the reality is that there's no evidence to substantiate that. There's no empirical evidence provided by them. There's no case studies or any other evidence before the committee to make out that argument. The current adult body rub parlor hasn't been targeted, hasn't been questioned, hasn't raised any concerns, and I submit that it's because it provides no impact in a negative fashion on the business community in that area. The second concern that was raised was human trafficking. And as Exeter Road is a corridor for that, my submission to council is, or to the committee is, that denying the move won't address the issue. There's no evidence that the movement there will impact it. It's everyone's opinion that it does, but there's no statistics or other information that is presently before committee that will substantiate that this establishment will increase that. And I put to council that, in fact, it won't. They do not foster this type of activity. There hasn't been one single charge or complaint lodged against my client in that regard. And that's simply because they have the policies, procedures in place to detect, deter, and combat such activity. The applicant is a family-run business, not a big corporation. They've been in business for 22 years in the industry. No ties to criminal or other organized crime or any other organization. None of the principals have criminal charges or criminal records. There hasn't been a complaint against them of this type of nature. The core unit conducts routine inspections and has found that they are in compliance. There's no reason that that's going to change now. And lastly, the argument about the gateway into the City of London. And the first gateway into London is Veterans Memorial Parkway, where my client's located. The concern is that that the adult live entertainment establishment will tarnish the view of travelers and tourists into the City of London. Fear-mongering, I suggest to you. That's no evidence to substantiate that. Does the garbage and the clear cutting of trees as you come into the City of London give people a positive impression of the fourth city? I leave that question for you to answer. But with the adult bodywear parlor presently in the location and the addition of this into the same building, I submit that it will have zero to minimal negative impact. The applicant is bound by the advertising guidelines that the new bylaw provides. And
Mr. Vitson-Yados, you're right at your 5 minutes. If you could wrap up.
I'm going to wrap it up. They're committed to complying with the bylaw, the signage, and all of the other requirements. The real issue is by not approving the transfer, it sends a clear message to the residents of London, especially those in East London, that City Hall doesn't value them, but rather values profits over people. And I suggest that you consider approving the location substitution. Those are my comments.
Thank you. We're going to finish with the PPM, and then I'll go to you, Councillor. Are there any other members of the public wishing to speak? And I'm looking down on the floor this time. No. Anybody in the gallery? No. Councillor Usher, did you have a specific question for one of the members of the public that spoke?
No, I'll just address it in my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll need a motion then to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Sally and seconded by the Mayor. And we can vote. Okay, I have Councillor Sally first up and followed by Councillor Usher.
Thank you.
Sorry, we have to report out first.
Rewind.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And play. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the members of the public for coming for your submissions. I think it's been very helpful. I just want to be clear. However, this, I decided to vote at the end of this. I want to be very clear. I know there was a comment. I'm not looking for cross debate, but it's a comment about it sends a strong message to East Londoners that if you vote in the opposite of this, then you're putting profits over people. That's not going to be the case for me, and I don't think that's going to be the case for any around this horseshoe. So, kind of offended at that comment, but I'll leave it at that. So, I know that one of the speakers talked about how there was 40% long-term residents that stay there, and I myself have seen quite a few families in the area. And if I'm not mistaken, when I was just looking on Google Maps, I don't know how accurate it is. I think it's dated 2017. I see the South Side sign. When you look at it from the other end, it advertises as a family restaurant. And just thinking about the 40% and just the concentration of hotel rooms in that area, I think we're looking at maybe a few hundred or a few thousand. I'll just look for nods. So it's quite significant. So I just kind of wanted to maybe ask staff if they can clarify, when we have the bylaw in place where it says around residentials, is it just specifically, do we know historically how we came to that bylaw, or what was the rationale of the families?
Through the chair, the focus was on lands that are zoned residential, so we looked at the existing licensed locations and found that several of those are around zoned residential, and that's where the complaints were coming from, and that's why we put this provision in the current business licensing bylaw.
And just as a follow-up, Chair, what were some of the complaints that were coming in?
Some of the complaints were that children could see out their bedroom windows and look out the back of these locations and see the strippers hanging around in the back and smoke breaks. Complaints about the signage, and there were other complaints regarding traffic, late night traffic in and out of the locations.
So just based on those comments that, I just heard comments from Mr. Katolik and the concerns that were raised in the past, I think it would be almost safe to say that this might be some of the similar concerns that may be raised by occupants, considering that 40% of them are long-term, considering that there's many people who are children and youth who come and stay at these hotels. So I think we're probably going to see some of these similar complaints. So I think that same rationale kind of essentially applies to this. So I just kind of wanted to point on that. I don't think I'll be supporting the request. I think some of the concerns that are laid out by some of the proponents in the neighborhood, and seeing that there was a unanimous against any proposal for this. I appreciate that they want to move out of East London. I think that maybe we can find a better place in the future, but I think the current proposed site does not sit well, and I don't think it's the best fit for the community at this time. So I'll leave my remarks for now and come back later on if I have more.
Councillor Usher.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Generally, as a guest, I like to give the committee a chance to speak, and then I don't. But I would prefer to speak now for several reasons. One is that I live closest to this place than anyone else in this room. It's not in my ward, but it's just west of my ward, just east of my ward. And my ward is affected. Not only is my ward affected, all of London is affected. We're affected because of the fact that I was just working on a proposal to put some signs up in this area, because I believe that this street is a gateway to London. And I have two signs that we are going to put up. And one of them said, "You are now entering White Oaks via the City of London." And that sign is something that we wanted to propose that we spend some money on to put up at that area. The other sign was that "You are now entering the City of London via White Oaks, Jalna." And the White Oaks, Jalna comes from a television series that was created way back in the 1970s called White Oaks of Jalna. Some of you may have heard of it. And most of the streets in White Oaks are named after the family of that White Oaks family from Jalna. So I wanted you to see that, and I also wanted you to pay some attention to this diagram, because it shows just to the left there the whole residential area. And yes, it's 300 meters away instead of 100 meters, but it affects all of the people who live in that area. And those are the people who have come to me. Those are the people who have written me. Those are the people who have called me over the past few months when this first surfaced. The problem is that everybody, or I'll say 1/3, most of the people who come into London, either for business or for visits or for sports, that's where they have to come. That's where they come. They come because they stay at those hotels, and they bring their kids, and they go and attend sports, mostly at the Western Fair over the weekend. They come to compete with other teams throughout the area, and those are the hotels that they stay at. And there are many, many, many kids who stay there Friday, Saturday, and Sundays. They come from other places. And as one of the people up there said, when people come here to visit to see if London is a place that they might want to live, they stay in those hotels also. They don't stay in the hotels downtown. They stay there because it's easier to get off the 401. So I think that those type of things need to be taken care of. I mentioned at the beginning that there's a church at the corner of, there's a building at the corner of Exeter, and I believe it's a Courtyard Manor, or whatever the name is. Anyway, it's number 7 on your diagram. And they hold a church service there. They've leased that place for the past over 10 years now. I remember when they moved out of Beth Emmanuel Church on Gray Street and moved down there. And they've grown their congregation vastly since then. I've been to their service a few times, and they take up a pretty large room. For me, that is a place of worship. So It may not be a church, but it is a place of worship, and you can ask whosoever is the owner of that place that if that is so or not, but that is true. So I say that this has maximum impact on the City of London, maximum impact on the residents, maximum impact on the children of the White Oaks area. And I think that you need to take that into consideration because it affects the youth, it affects the adults, and it affects the residents of London. So I wanted to give you that background because I think it is important. And again, I say to you, it's close to my ward, it's in Jared's ward, but it's close enough that it's practically part of my ward because every single person in my ward, when they're coming back home from visiting somewhere else, they've got to pass through there to get home. And on a Friday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon when they're coming home, they have their cars packed with kids. Is that what you want them to pass by? I don't think so. Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Well, I know we're not allowed to cross debate on things, but I certainly wish we could. I guess the thing is, the other location, why I would support this, why this makes sense, is this is exactly the type of area that we talked about that these establishments should be in. This is a commercial area. Behind it is warehousing and light industrial. Bessemer Road is all, again, light industrial, commercial. And so, and this is not right on the corner of Wellington and Exeter Road. It's in a ways. And then the original picture you saw there, there's already an establishment there. And
I was just
sorry.
paying attention to.
I thought a point of order or something.
Oh, no.
There's already an establishment there, and I don't recollect ever anybody coming in saying anything about that establishment causing problems. And so, you know, here's an opportunity for this business. They're obviously going to invest a lot of money here. And I look at their existing operation where it is, and just so everybody understands, it's in a very, very old hotel, and it operates, and if I'm wrong about this, I apologize, it operates in the basement of a very old hotel. There's been little or no renovations, I believe, over the years. So this is on a main floor of a new building, a business that's going to invest. And as I say earlier, and that's why I asked the question, it will have to meet all of today's standards, including even accessibility, where I don't think the other place even meets accessibility rules of today. So I think that this location makes a lot of sense. Now let's go back to the other location. That's right. It's right beside the city library. That was an issue way back. But the problem was it was an established business. If today they wanted to open there, it wouldn't be allowed. Library, that's right. You've got little next door, you have a daycare. I think there's 50 kids in there. I happened to go in and find, got the numbers just recently. So there's 50 kids. There's a library right next door. Again, with this establishment, you have the OPP across the street. We've heard from the hotel owners in the area that they've been working with the police on issues in that area and in their hotels, and I commend them for doing that. I hope they'll continue to do that, and because that issue we need to eliminate. Having said that, there is no evidence that this establishment will bring that issue out there. Now, I've been the counselor, the current establishment, I've been the counselor for that area for over 20 years. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of that issue being an issue with the current establishment. So if it becomes an issue, it's because it's existing out there already, not that it's being brought out there. So I just want to make that, you know, a lot of a lot of the information that's being given is anecdotal, and there is no evidence of it. And I have to, as far as the management of this company, I have had no complaints about their management style. So I'm sure if they move out there, they will operate the business the way that they've operated now.
You have about a minute left, Councillor.
So I think this is a better site. I'm out there, I know the area quite well. I don't know if it's a main route for people going home or from White Oaks, because Bessemer Road really leads into an industrial light area, commercial area. And so I don't understand, the people who would live anywhere around there, why this would be a frequent road to travel. Certainly down Wellington Road, yes, certainly, West Exeter, sure, people travel that way to get to and from home, but that's really commercial, light industrial in there. So I think that this would make a better site and compared to its current site. And I think the thing is, it's a business. They have a right to move to a new location. They have a right to operate as a legal business.
Okay, you're over time, Councillor. You wrap it up anytime, please.
And so I think some of the arguments I heard, I don't buy, not in any way. So in any event, I hope the committee will support this. It makes sense. And as I say, if people saw the current establishment and the new establishment, I think in every way it'll be superior. So I want everyone to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, appreciate, interesting to hear some, I guess, contradictory comments, regarding that this is a good establishment with good management and it's managed well, but I don't want it there and you should have it and it'll be fine there, which comments are fair to make. I might disagree with them. I want to talk about a few things, and firstly, I want to thank Brendan and Stacy for coming out today. I know I had a chance to talk with them from the Hoteliers Association and speaking to a number of the issues they have already spoken about. So two things from the tourism perspective. One, yes, it is a gateway. Yes, you can access Exeter Road from the 401 directly. That's pretty significant access to the city. You would drive directly past this strip club. In next year, we will be hosting the Junos, which is really exciting for the city. A number of the hotels in this area will likely be hosting rooms for this incredible thing that the city is going to be hosting. So it'll be a really great way for people to come into the city and be right next to a strip club. In a few years, we just discussed the possibility and I believe probability of now hosting AMO, a significant municipal organization conference for 2 years potentially. Also, people will be staying directly at these hotels. There has been discussion around the OPP station across the road, which, on the face of it does seem like a good idea. So there's going to be police right across the road, but people should know that the OPP does not have jurisdiction in the City of London. It is the City of London Police that have jurisdiction. And if people were to call the police, it would not be the OPP responding. It would be London Police Service. Currently, it would be a lot quicker for them to attend to the current location than it would be to the location almost on the outskirts of the city. Just want to point that out there. Councillor Usher made a good point, and the planner also made a good point that while yes, this might fit in with 100 meters away from residential, there is 300 meters away to residential, to a significant residential neighborhood in the south end of the city. Another piece which was talked about, which I wanted to delve into a little bit more, was the concerns around sex trafficking, which are already issues which the hotels are addressing. And frankly, I'm quite bothered by the comments that going here is not going to create any more problems. It's going to create likely more problems because now you would have a adult parlor, a strip club, whatever you want to call it, which would now back onto an already existing massage parlor in those buildings. So I'm not an expert on human and sex trafficking, but just imagine the combination of those two facilities right next to each other, being next to hotels, how much that might multiply these issues. And frankly, this issue of the massage parlor being there already has caused so many problems for the local businesses that one of them had to put up a giant wall so that their windows didn't look into the massage parlor. That exists. Go look at the giant black wall there. That is what they had to do to make sure their business and their tenants coming to stay at their hotels didn't have to see that. So certainly the current location, I understand, is not the ideal location, but just because this first location has been presented to us does not mean it's the best location either. The proponent can bring back to us another location if they so desire, but frankly, I think for the number of points that have already been made, this is not an appropriate location for this facility to move to.
Councillor Squire.
First, a question, Madam Chair, to staff. Is the decision to accept this movement, I understand the zoning is fine for it, is it completely discretionary to councillors or some test we have to apply in making this decision? And if that's a legal question, I don't need to go on camera to get the answer, but it seems to me we're being asked to just make this decision based on what we feel is most sort of appropriate in the circumstances, and I'm not seeing a test that we're supposed to apply.
Through the chair, the report is a submission from Civic Administration and simply indicates that it meets the locational requirements, and it's purely your discretion whether you want to approve the substitution or not.
Yeah, I guess my comments, first of all, through the chair, I don't think the present location is a good one at all, and I agree with that it's not good where it is. But moving it to a place where I can't help but notice when I drive into the City of London, I come down Exeter Road, the number of hotels there, and my experience has always been that families do spend a lot of time there, sports teams, young kids, and I'm very uncomfortable with this being the location that we decide, even if it's within the zoning. I don't blame the applicant. I don't think it's their fault at all. It may be our fault a little bit because we've said, here's the zoning, and they've complied with that zoning. So I don't think we should be getting into condemning or anything like that. I myself am not comfortable right now saying, yes, let's move it from a really bad location to just a bad location. And I think that's maybe what we would be doing, and I'm certainly, unless somebody convinces me otherwise, I'm not comfortable with that. And I respect what local councillors have seen, and it's really valuable for me to find out about the privacy steps that people have gone to protect themselves from these uses. So I'm swayed by that.
Mayor Brown.
Thank you. I'm prepared to make a motion, but because we are on new territory, I'm unfamiliar with what that motion might be. There's, if not full consensus, there's significant agreement that this location should not move from the existing location to the proposed location. So as I read the staff recommendation, it's for information with a reminder that we can make a change. And then as I read the conclusion, the staff report indicates that it's council's prerogative to refuse the application. So what I'm looking for is just the wording that would be most appropriate to ensure that this establishment stays at its existing location and does not move to its to the proposed location. Once we have that wording, I'm happy to move it. I mean, if we take no action, if we just receive the report, effectively, does that get us to where we need to be, Chair?
I'm waiting for a response from staff.
Through the chair, I'm just referring to section 9.7 of the business licensing bylaw, which states CAPS shall recommend to council whether or not to make an amendment to Schedule 3A of the bylaw. Council shall make the final decision whether or not to amend Schedule 3A of the bylaw. So reading that, it indicates that you shall make a recommendation whether to amend the bylaw or not.
So I'd move a recommendation to not amend the bylaw.
Okay. Can I ask a quick question of staff? Would that be sufficient, or would it be preferable for committee to cite reasons for not amending?
Through the chair, it's not a Planning Act application, so it's not something that could be appealable to the OMB, so simply saying yay or nay.
Thank you. Are you finished, Mayor?
Yeah, if there's a second to that.
So the mayor is moving that to not amend the bylaw, and Councillor Sully has indicated that he would second, and I will go to Councillor Armstrong.
Well, I'll be happy to speak to that. I won't be supporting that. And, you know, it's pretty obvious this business, and it is a legal operating business, has asked for an opportunity to move to a new location. This new location meets all the criteria. We've heard that from staff. So you're denying them a right to go somewhere else. In fact, I don't know the circumstances. Maybe if they stay there, by you making this decision, that'll end their business. I don't.
Point of personal privilege.
What? I'm speaking.
Can I have your mic?
Sure.
The councilor's looking directly at me. He's using terms like "you are making them," and if he's speaking directly to me, I think it's entirely out of order. This is a motion that I've moved. It's been seconded by a committee member, and should the committee decide together to move forward in this direction, that's a decision
Thank you, Mayor.
that we are making.
Thanks, Mayor. Can you please look at me, Councillor Armstrong, and direct your comments to the chair?
Mrs. Presiding Officer, I guess the thing is, I look around the room all the time, and I'm actually surprised that the mayor
It's fine.
would think that I'm looking at him I'm looking around the room.
It's fine. Just direct your comments to the
that's
chair,
fine.
please. To me and through me, please.
In any event, I guess the thing is this business has an opportunity to operate anywhere where it's appropriate and they have the zoning and you know, in place. This site meets all the criteria. So I don't understand. The only argument that's been made that I can see that may have some merit is other businesses around them don't want them there. But as we heard earlier, there's already existing establishment there. This is another establishment in part of the building. This is a superior site from what I feel is a health and safety perspective. It's a newer building. It's on a main floor. It will have to meet all of today's standards. No grandfathering. No grandfathering. So I hope council, if you don't already know the current building, I hope you understand the comparison between the old building and the new building. There's a big difference. So understand, if you support the motion that's been put forward, the business will continue in that old building. So I think this is a better situation. The business is going to continue to operate. And so you've heard the arguments from different councillors. I don't agree with these arguments, and some of them, you know, don't make a lot of sense to me, but that's my interpretation of what's been said here today. So in any event, I wish the applicant, I don't know what the opportunity after the process, but certainly I'm sure that they will take it further if we don't support it. And I can see, I see some merit in that. I really do. Because the arguments I heard today, to me, don't make a lot of sense.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This seems a whole lot like planning, and for any of you who follow council, you'll notice that I've never sat on the planning committee for very good reason. I think a part of it is my more libertarian point of view about a person's right to kind of do as they choose on their property. So my first instinct is someone has property, they want to lease it to a business, go for it. What actually though, and I want to say thank you to everyone who spoke, and I did listen to all of your comments and I weigh them carefully. As much as I don't like planning, I was paying attention to this one because it's part of the committee I'm sitting on. And what I heard was something I didn't know before, and it was about the long-term stays and about the residential component of the hotels that are there. So my question to Mr. Katolik is, if the nearest hotel building was an apartment building, would this still conform with the policy?
Through the chair, hypothetically, if the nearest motel was zoned for an apartment building and an apartment building was there, then it would not meet the current business licensing regulations.
Okay, and so I think I'm hearing layers and shadows of moralistic comments, to be honest, and judgmental things from my colleagues from everywhere. And that's a problem. I think if people have a problem with this type of business, you need to address that. You don't need to address it by trying to block and trying to zone. And if the public has a problem with this type of business, I think then you need to let your councillors know and you need to force them to address that. I'm also hearing a lot of innuendo and comments about what this business means. And maybe I don't understand what happens at a massage parlor or a strip club. I think I do, but maybe I don't, because I'm hearing a lot of implications that it means something different than what I understand. So I think in this case, Councillor Squire also swayed me, and I'm going to say that in terms of his comments and saying, you know, you don't go from a bad location to a slightly better location. That's not a good reason to approve the move. I'm not going to support it, and what I'm not going to support it primarily is because of my understanding that the long-term stay component of the nearest place would, in my mind, make that residential, and our policy speaks already to this business would not be allowed if that was considered an apartment building and zoned as an apartment building. And so because that's what the building is used for, I think that makes good sense to me, that this is not the best location. I welcome the applicants to find a better location and to work with our staff to help identify what those locations are. I don't have any opposition to operating a business in the City of London. I think that just find the best location for it, find one that conforms with what our policy is intended to be. So whether it's zoned commercial or zoned residential, the intent is that your business will not be near a place that people live. And so I'm not going to support a recommendation that allows the move of this business license at this time. I probably will support an application at another time if it's a more appropriate location.
Councillor Helmer.
First, I want to say, I think every time we talk about adult entertainment and licensing around that, I think we can be not very careful in our language and talk about adult entertainment businesses and the people who work in that industry in a way that makes them feel like they're not wanted or somehow less than other people who are doing other kinds of work. And I want to be very clear that that's not what I believe. And I think this is a business that deserves to be able to operate in the City of London. And I know we've taken this very prescriptive approach to regulating it. I think that has a lot of drawbacks. And I think when I'm thinking about where these things should be located, I'm trying to think about what it's like for somebody to get there to go to work. And, you know, I would say both these locations are not great. There are some problems with the location on Dundas Street. It's very close to the YMCA childcare facility. It's very close to the residential that's in right in behind it. And it's clearly would not align with the locational criteria in the bylaw now. So I think we should want it to be somewhere else. If we actually agree with those locational criteria, we should want it to move, and we should want it to move relatively soon. I would agree with Councillor Armstrong that the new location does meet the sort of strict interpretation of those criteria, but I think I hear what Councillor Ridley is saying around, we're trying to avoid residential areas. Well, these hotels are essentially always occupied by people at pretty high utilization rates. And so there's a lot of people living right around those areas. And so I think, maybe the locational criteria need to be revised. I think the applicant has tried to follow those criteria, and they come forward with the proposal for a location, and then I said, well, it doesn't say anything about hotels. So, of course, we went for a site that does work. I think there's some other drawbacks with this location. For one thing, there's no sidewalks on that side of the street in that area. The closest transit stop is like a kilometer away. So it's not actually an easy place to get to unless you're driving. And I think that that's a pretty significant drawback in terms of even just on the north side of that street compared to the south side of the same street. So I would like to see the location move from where it is. I do think that there may be in the future a better location that would work better, not because of the conflict with the hotels. I think, especially considering that there's the body rub parlor that's been there since 1999, I think that is pretty much the same issue. And I know why people don't want it to locate there, but I don't really think that that's a great reason. It's more those access pieces around, how are people supposed to get to this location that I think are more problematic. But I recognize those are not criteria in the licensing either. So I'm going to think about this one between now and council. I'm not sure exactly whether I think this location in the south is actually slightly better than the location that exists now. It's harder to get to for people. I'm interested to hear from people who actually work in the industry, what they think about these two locations. And I think, once again, we've had a whole discussion without really talking to anybody who's working in that industry. I know it's not part of the licensing regime, but I think we got to think about why is that, and perhaps we should be getting feedback from people about that. And I'll think about it between now and council, whether I think, refusing the application is really the best thing to do on balance, because the location now is clearly not meeting those locational criteria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been cleared up, and just talking to the mayor on the side, we had suggested to just remove there was a word, I don't want to repeat it, because for some people it could be considered an offensive word, but I recognize that's the name of the business, but it was Golden Dash something ladder, but it could be considered a misogynistic word, and I just thought, as council, we committed to a gender lens and all those pieces, so I thought it was appropriate. I recognize that's the name of the business, but just in moving forward in the future, just to be kind of conscious of those things, but I think we're good for now.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? Okay, I'd like to make a couple from the chair. Thank you to everybody from the public that spoke. Thank you to the proponents, the applicants looking to move their business. I agree with Councillor Helmer on a lot of the points that he made, and with Councillor Ridley as well, that this is a legitimate business that we license in the City of London. But I do sit on the planning committee, and I have been on the planning committee for almost 3 of the last almost 4 years. And we deal with land use conflicts there a lot. And is 2010 Dundas a perfect location for this? Absolutely not. We've heard that. Would it meet the criteria of today? No, absolutely not. Does that mean the proposed location on Exeter Road is ideal? And we've heard from many members of the public and from many councillors that it is not an ideal location. So there are significant land use conflicts between the new location and this particular business. I agree that the applicant should continue to look for a better location. And one of the points that was made by a member of the public made a lot of sense to me as well, in that the businesses that exist right now, including the YMCA and the library, generally are not in operation at the peak hours of this particular business. So there don't seem to be business-wise those kind of same land use conflicts that we're seeing on with the Exeter Road hotels and motels that are there. It's not about morals for me. We license these businesses, and I think our staff do a good job of making sure that these businesses are operating according to our bylaws and everything. So I think that's great. And I agree with Councillor Helmer that we also need to consider the needs of the people that are working in these establishments. And these are people that are not generally making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. These are the kinds of people that would take transit, that could possibly take transit, or other means to get to their place of employment. So I think that's a really important consideration, and I think that's something we do have to consider going forward. And if it means down the road looking at how we do this, who do our business licensing bylaw, if we might add something in there to consider the kinds of employees that work at the different kinds of businesses, not just this kind of business. So I will support the motion that the mayor has put forward and Councillor Sully has seconded. And I'll look around and see if there are any more comments. Councillor Usher.
I just want to make one comment, and I'm going to ask staff if they could do this, and I could check it out. But I said that there is a place of worship that is being held in number 7 on that site. And I don't know if that negates the criteria or not, but I think that that needs to be taken into consideration in the future, any future endeavors in this street.
So Councillor, if we could, maybe staff could investigate that and have a response by the time we go to council? Yes, Mr. Kotsifas.
Through the chair, the premises at the courtyard are approximately 185 meters away, so it's beyond the distance criteria.
Councillor Armstrong.
So the churches doesn't seem, if it's outside the required distance, then it's a non-issue. I guess the thing is what I heard, and I'll keep this very short and to the point, is a legal business that has a right to locate wherever it's legally appropriate. Again, this is a superior location in many, many ways. I think it's really, and when I hear councillors say, well, maybe they can find a better location. I mean, first of all, the criteria is tough for business to, in this particular industry, to find the right fit. It's really tough. There aren't that many locations. So finally, they find the right spot that meets all the criteria. And what I'm hearing is, you know, maybe you should find a different location. It's very difficult. And I think the thing is, this is a business that's making a business decision that they can move here, run a business, and survive. So who knows what the ramifications are of this refusal, which it appears to be. You may actually be putting them out of business because they're moving for a reason. They're moving. Businesses move for a reason. Quite often, it's to improve their business. And so they see this as a site where they can invest and survive and hopefully prosper. And I didn't hear anybody here say that they should go out of business. But in fact, by saying they should find some other place when it's difficult to do that, and they say this is the right place, and they meet all the criterias, never mind where they are now, we should really be saying yes to them, in all fairness. If it was any other business, we probably would.
Councillor Safeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, just good question Councillor Armstrong raised. Maybe staff can prepare a map of the city that has all the areas where these could locate. It'd be helpful for us to know, I think, and maybe for the proponents to know where other locations might be suitable to locate, because frankly, I think, given the 100 meters, there could be quite a significant number of locations throughout the city they could locate, and it'd be helpful to have that.
Okay.
Through the chair, that might be a large project to do because we'd have to locate all the churches, daycares that are existing on the day of the application. It's not as simple as saying provide a map showing where taverns are permitted. It's doing an existing land use, what's existing today. Might be lengthy to do, but possible.
I recall a similar situation with the supervised consumption facilities coming from planning staff, a similar kind of challenge. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded, and we can call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
Thank you, committee, and thank you again to members of the public that came out to speak to the committee on this item, on that item. We'll move on to section 4 and item 4.1, the second report of the Child Care Advisory Committee. Looking to see if there are any comments or questions from committee members. Councillor Sully is moving her seat and the mayor is seconding. And Councillor Ridley, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I did have a question. Typically, advisory committee agendas are put in consent with the exception of when there's action. So the only action I saw in this was the 2018 work plan. I don't know if there was anything else.
Yeah, it's just their work plan and looking for our approval of their work plan. So it's been moved and seconded, and I believe we can call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So item 4.3 is a letter from Dr. Chris Mackey, and it is something that's been on this committee's deferred matter list for a while. We had way back when the mayor and Dr. Mackey proposed the formation of the opioid crisis working group, we had asked Dr. Mackey to come back with an update, and he has provided us with this update in the letter. So I'm looking to committee to see if there are any comments. Mayor Brown, please, go ahead.
I just wanted to move receipt. I know this has been an outstanding matter. We moved this through Planning Committee yesterday, and I think that everyone's aware that this is well on its way.
Any other comments? I have a question for the clerk. So will this automatically then be removed from item 4 on our deferred matters list? Yes. And the answer is yes. So the mayor has moved receipt of the update. Is there? I will second it since I'm not seeing anyone jumping up, and we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Item 5.1 is our deferred matters list. Councillor Sully is moving receipt. Is that right? And Councillor Ridley is seconding that. I'm not seeing any comments, so let us open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
I'll move it.
So the final item is an added item, and it's a request for delegation status. So Councillor Sully is moving, approve the delegation at a future meeting? No, she requested specifically the May 29th meeting. And Councillor Squire is seconding that motion, and I'm not seeing any comments or questions, so we can vote on that right away.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Really? I didn't see him. I'm not, Councillor Ridley has moved adjournment. Do I have a second? Second by Councillor Sully. All in favor? Any opposed? No opposed, it carries. Thank you, everybody. Great meeting. See you in a while.